looks like
Everybody's on.
back, so we can move in. So members, just a little bit of all of the most of these issues, or well, really maybe all of them, may or may not, as you choose, lead to things like potential rulemaking and the like. But each of these memos that I and others have prepared for you do not include specific proposed rulemaking, because the point of the retreat, of course, is to discuss these policy issues and make decisions and give guidance. And some of these, or most of these, or none of these, we'll see, may lead to potential rulemaking activity. But what I would hope from a staff perspective is that as we move through these different items, as a consensus emerges, if it does on particular topics, there may be specific direction, and probably will be specific direction to staff to maybe turn these into specific rulemaking propositions. But we just wanted you guys to have the opportunity to discuss these issues freely and at the policy level, and then as you get some idea of what you want to do, staff, of course, will happily take your direction on those and begin creating specific rules as needed, or whatever you need. So I think then we can roll, Ashley, into the first item on here. And let me make sure, Missy, are you back on?
Yep, I'm right here.
So you all know that we have a board rule that requires, I'm getting an echo from somebody. Y'all, I'm still getting it. That's gone now. We have a board rule 1606, which requires that prior to issuing an original permit for a pharmacy or a DME permit, that the pharmacist manager of a pharmacy, or the person in charge of a DME facility, has to appear personally at the board to obtain that permit. And some of you will remember back in 2015, Bill, I know you remember this, and Wallace, I know you remember this. We had NABP come in and do a review of our operations. I wanted an outside look-see at how we did things to make some recommendations. And one of the things that NABP had suggested we consider is whether we needed to continue having the in-person meeting requirement to issue permits. And there was some discussion of that at a retreat back in 2015. And there was, as I recall, some substantial openness by the board to look at modifying that. And as I told Ashley yesterday, I take responsibility for this. It was never really any follow-up. It just became a sort of tertiary level priority. So we didn't make any changes, but we have, of course, not been holding in-person permit meetings since March of this year. And so it seems like it's an opportune time to do some thinking about whether not having the in-person permit meetings is something that we should make permanent or alter in some way. So with that, then, Missy, I'm going to hand it over to you. And Missy's provided various documents. I thought it might be helpful to sort of start out by going through what the permit vetting process is today, apart from any in-person meeting requirement, and use that as a jumping off point for talking about whether we think that the rule should continue to require a meeting or not. So,
yep. Good
Missy, it's all yours.
Again. All right. So on the attachments that are, I guess, behind the tabs is, kind of an overview of what the licensing specialist does when a pharmacy registration application comes in. And one point of note, Registration applications, pharmacy and DME registration applications, are the only ones that we require to come to the meeting, to the permit meeting. Pharmacy transfer of ownerships and pharmacy and DME transfer of ownerships and pharmacy and DME re-registrations are not required to attend the meeting. So this would only be for new registrations of pharmacies and DMEs. So, we have the online application. I've attached that. I mean, it's fairly lengthy, but what that shows you is all the items that we collect. And as you can see, we collect a lot of items. I think, we've been told that our application is longer than most. And I think, that that's a good thing. We gather a lot of information. So the licensing specialist, which is Wendy Watson, she does a great job. She receives the applications on her dashboard. She reviews everything, payment, uploads, make sure that everything is filled in correctly and accurately, make sure we don't have any problems with our database, the system, and just make sure that everything is there. After that's done, then she sends it over to the review committee, which is, people from enforcement. So, the director of investigations, the director of inspections, we have a little group of people that are looking at the applications, and they go through, do their checks and balances, and, make sure that everything seems appropriate. They will reach out to the pharmacist manager if there's any questions or anything that needs clarification on. And then at the end of their review, they approve it, send it back to Wendy to, tell the applicant that they can attend the meeting. And then they get a letter via email that says you can come to the meeting now. I have attached to, I guess it's on page 6 of the attachment, that the email that we're currently sending. The email that we're currently sending says, you're approved for a meeting, but hey, wait, we're not having in-person meetings right now, so so don't come, and you will be issued your number on the next permit meeting day. But before that happened, before the executive order happened by the governor, people would have to come. We go through the application. Josh usually headed the meetings, and we would go through the application, each person's application, and then at the end of that, they would receive their number. Since the meetings aren't happening right now, we just email them their number on the permit meeting day. And that's kind of an overview of the process as it currently stands.
One of the things y'all may want to take a look at it if you do, but the PowerPoint that Missy put together that goes through the application itself. Ashley, I think you had asked about this some time back about could we put a resource apart from what we're discussing right now, but I think you had asked, could we put a resource on the website that folks go to and see everything that's going to appear as they start going through that online application. So that's what this PowerPoint is, and it has been posted on the board's website, so folks can use that. So thanks for
doing that. Yeah.
Missy did it.
It was
it's
a
terrific.
good suggestion, because people did wonder kind of what is on there, and it's difficult because ours is such a dynamic application, so well done, so that if you click yes to one thing, then you'll get presented with something else. So it's difficult to put all that in one thing, but with a PowerPoint changed to PDF, I think we worked it out. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Missy, for doing that.
Do new applicants, are they required to see that, or are they made aware that it's available? I know they're not required, but are they made aware? Or is it only if there's...
Yeah, I mean, it's on our website.
Well, being there doesn't necessarily make them aware that it's available.
Right, it's a fair point.
I guess we haven't advertised it. We certainly could.
Yeah, we sure could put it either somewhere when somebody logs in to start the application process. We could link it somewhere to say, if you'd like to take a tour of what the applications are like, click here. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great one.
So I think what we're interested in, and y'all is sort of asking as many questions as you want about this process and the vetting of how an application moves from receipt here to approval at the end, with an eye toward thinking about, do we think that this is a process without a meeting that is sufficient to carry out our duty to the public, to make sure that those who receive permits have demonstrated their qualification to do that? Or do we think that the attendance continues to serve a valuable function, and what that is, and
Okay.
how the rules should work?
I have a question. So I went through the PowerPoint for the permit meeting and I like it. My question is, if we require them to review this in lieu of a meeting, how are you going to know that they did it?
Right, I think that's a valid point. I think that that would be something that y'all would need to discuss. If you need to know that someone did prior to issuing a permit number, then we could program something in along those lines. If you didn't need to know, then we wouldn't need to program additionally anything.
I think the information is valuable. As best as I can remember, the in-person meeting focused a lot on the responsibility of the PM. And as board members, we rely on the fact that they have heard that information in person as to the responsibilities of the pharmacist manager. I'm fine with them viewing something online and not having to show up in person. I honestly think that it's a waste of resources, especially for an out-of-state permit.
I think Wallace has a comment there too. Sorry,
but
Bill.
I do think they need this training, whether it's a PowerPoint or some other tool, but the PowerPoint's a great start. But I do think we need something besides an attestation that they saw it. That's too easy to just perfunctorily say, yeah, I watched it, or just scan through it in 10 seconds or less. And to me, a post test would be a nice way to handle that easily. Of course, Andy can speak to how they issue, codes at the end of a CE program, and without that, you don't get your cookie. But anyway, that's my.
Wallace, did you want to say something?
Yes, I was just thinking while Bill was talking, we have all these modules at the hospital that we are required to complete every year. And it's all part of, Joint Commission's requirements and risk management requirements of things that, like HIPAA rules say, we've got a whole HIPAA module that we've got to complete every year. You don't complete it, you don't get your raise. Well, the way it's built is it's the PowerPoint, and at certain points you are sort of tested on, some key points from what you've looked at in the prior 3 or 4 or 5 slides. Then at the end of it, there is some page that pops up that you have to log in your credentials and with your employee number and password and all that stuff. And it records that you have completed that module, which I would think you would be able to do something like that with this PowerPoint that Missy's fixed. That, I don't know what's involved in building it, exactly how you would do it, but that would capture the test module and, and all those pieces that Bill's talking about, which I think is a good idea. So I just throw that out as an example of something that we do.
The Ethics Commission training we do, which is voice over slides, to me is, that's really well done. And I think they use the Institute of Government to help build that
It's a good
I have a
point.
question for the staff. What do you find any value of laying eyes on these people that are applying for a permit?
No, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know if Jay has any
I mean,
other
no,
thoughts on it,
Not
but we
particularly.
don't.
No,
it was one of those questions I felt like was worth asking just for the record.
it is. It's a great question, Keith. And I can remember one time, and Josh, you probably remember this guy, but one time in my 15 years here, we had a guy show up looking to get an out-of-state permit. We had not actually notified him that he should be at the permit meeting, and he came and he tried to buffalo us about getting a permit. You'll be shocked to learn it turned out this guy was operating a pill mill down in Florida, and he ultimately not only didn't get a permit from us, I'm pretty sure he got charged criminally somewhere down the line. But can I even say that, did the fact that he showed up make it? No, not really. I think the key from my standpoint is there information that we want to emphasize to the would-be permit holder? And I think there probably is. And is a meeting a necessary means for conveying that information, or can it be done in other ways like y'all are talking about? But no, nobody's ever come in. I say, look at those beady eyes. They're not getting a permit. Get it.
So Jay, I have a question. This is Ashley. I noticed that in the initial, I guess the agenda item, in-person permit meetings, where you type some stuff out, that you're referencing Virginia, South Carolina, and Tennessee and Georgia, where those inspectors are actually going in to new pharmacies and do an inspection of that.
Right.
So,
and so, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ashley. So again, that's from the 2015 report that NABP gave us. And one of the things I put in the memo, thinking about whether we need to have these meetings or not, unlike in 2015, now any compounding pharmacy gets a pre-opening inspection. An in-state, only divide up in-state and out-of-state. Any in-state compounding pharmacy gets a pre-opening inspection to make sure they can comply with the quality and safety standards. And any non-compounding new pharmacy within North Carolina gets inspected within 1 year of getting its permit. All out-of-state pharmacy permit applicants have to provide a current inspection, and it has to be, if they're it's an operating inspection, whether they're compounding or they're not compounding. Now, clearly, a compounding pharmacy, we want to see an inspection that demonstrates that the pharmacy is complying with the requisite USP standards. And for a non-compounding pharmacy, we insist on an operating inspection. And we take that from the home state board of pharmacy or an NABP VPP inspection. So we weren't doing those things programmatically back in 2015, Ashley, but we are doing them now. And to me, that mitigates further against the need for somebody showing up in person, that we are going into the pharmacies.
okay, I think Michelle and Clint both have something to say.
I just have a question and I may have missed it. At the beginning, I think, Missy, you said that between the renewals, they don't have to show up. It's just these new ones, DME, right?
Right, pharmacy and DME original registration.
Original
applicants.
registration. What was the rationale behind them originally having to come in? Because there's a difference between the renewal. Yeah. There was a difference between the renewal and the new. So what was the original rationale? And has that gone away?
That's I'll try to take that, Missy. It's going to be some speculation here, Michelle, because this rule's been around for a long time and predates me by years and years and years. I've always assumed that there were sort of two functions being served by the in-person meeting requirement. One was providing certain information about that's specific to North Carolina, if it was an out-of-state pharmacy, or about pharmacist manager responsibilities, what the board is, how the board operates. And I think too, Michelle, there was probably an aspect of this was sort of a rough substitute to the, you can argue about whether it was any kind of substitute, but a rough substitute for not routinely doing pre-opening inspections of new pharmacies, that this was some means of attaching the board attaching itself personally to an applicant. But that's Michelle, that's my speculation. Dave Work, of course, would have known. I'm sure he was probably worked with the board to draw up the original rule. And Wallace was on the board when I started. Obviously, I don't know if it was ever, but I don't think there was ever any amendment to this rule or enactment. I think that predates your first couple of terms too, Wallace. So that's the best I can do with that, Michelle. I know it's not a terribly satisfying answer.
Could it be construed as being anti-competitive?
Probably not, because it applies to everybody. I mean, everybody, wherever you're from or whatever you're doing, you have to be there. I mean, there's certainly no question, though, Bill, that for certain applicants, if you're having to travel all the way across the country, it's expensive. But you know, for some folks who are hoofing it from far western or eastern North Carolina, it's
and if it does it apply, it applies to LSP. So if you're putting in a new Pyxis machine, then you have to make a trip to Chapel Hill to get a permit. To me, that's just not
correct.
That's not good use of anybody's resources.
I think we need Clint, who's patiently been waiting.
I don't know if you need my participation, but I was going to say, to the question of whether we get a benefit from folks coming, arguably we get a detriment from forcing folks to come, because it would not surprise you that when we get problems, particularly with out-of-state permits, they have not made their actual pharmacist manager their pharmacist manager for North Carolina purposes. They made some fool that they could force get on a plane and come to North Carolina their pharmacist manager. And so the person who is nominally responsible for ensuring compliance with North Carolina law is not at all responsible for anything in the pharmacy.
Or some monkey. I mean, there are companies who incentivize pharmacists to be the PM on paper just for that purpose.
That is certainly true. The second thing I wanted to say, just so that mainly so somebody could remind me as we go down the road, arguably we cannot have people watch a video and then ask them questions, because then we're imposing an extra statutory requirement for permitting that their pharmacist manager be able to remember stuff longer than 15 minutes. So we might need to do a code or something like that to avoid questions. And that's all I got to say about that.
So you're saying a post-test would be statutorily inappropriate?
I'm saying the argument would be the statute says here's what you need to do to get a permit. And one of those things is not effectively pass a test on the requirements. Now you could say the test is just, were you awake enough to listen to this video? But that's something we'd have to balance.
Bill, I thought you made a pretty good analogy or comparison a little while back when you talked about the Ethics Commission training. Yeah. And those modules don't have a test on them. Or do they? Or do you have to answer any questions?
Yes, you do, but I don't know that you can fail it.
Oh, I see that. It's like if you miss it. But we can work with that. And what I would say is that if the notion was we wanted to have some sort of module, we could work with Third Wheel Media to create a module. That would not be a difficult project to do. We'd have to do some thinking, and I'm just spitballing here. We would think about things like maybe what you would do is you would create a module, and then when when an application has been vetted and deemed ready to approve, that maybe when the email notification goes out, part of what goes out with that is a link to the module. And folks who do the module, and we'd figure out some way that we could document that somebody had done the module. So I think obviously that we don't want to get into the weeds of the detail of that today, but I would say that that concept is one that strikes me as readily implementable.
Well, and this kind of goes along with, you know, what we had talked about. I don't know, it's been probably about a year ago, about pharmacist managers and understanding their responsibilities. I mean, this is something that could be easily used to, you know, as a refresher, you know, as a tool available for pharmacist managers, just to go back and say, hey, you know, what am I responsible for? Because, you know, sadly, probably the majority of pharmacist managers may, you know, they say I'm responsible for the pharmacy, but what specific things am I responsible for?
And to Keith's point, and this is kind of a separate issue, but it ties in, that's a big enough issue that in the state of Virginia, you have to be a pharmacist for 2 years before you can be pharmacist manager. They did that, back in 18 or 19, Jay?
Yeah, it's relatively recent.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So they can't take a kid right out of school anymore and make them a pharmacist manager. You've got to have 2 years as a pharmacist under your belt before you can be PIC. Which, you know, we could talk about the pros and cons of that. I just thought that would tie in a little bit to the concerns of, do they really know what they're responsible for in any state?
I sort of like that concept because, I mean, the hospital, to get back to those modules that we have to complete, you can't fail those either. I mean, you can back up, you know, and redo the test or whatever. You can just back up, do it as many times as you want. But if it's just they pick out of what you need to know about HIPAA, for example, and they want you to at least answer that question right, you know. So, but I like the idea of trying to use some of this stuff to review them of what are the responsibilities of pharmacist manager. You can probably go through that list and craft some things that are like really the important things about being a pharmacist manager.
Okay, I have a question. What is the real huge rub? What's the biggest rub about it still remaining in person?
I think, Misty, you want to take that sort of what
Sure.
you did a good pro and con on that.
Yeah. At the let's see, page 6 again has some pros of not having the meeting. I think the biggest one is probably staff time and energy. Wendy has to appear and Josh has to appear at the meeting. That could be time that is spent reviewing applications instead of asking the same questions that we've already asked. I don't know if you have more, Jay.
And well, I also think that also what's been discussed, and Bill's hit on it, and I think some others have as well, is there's clearly there's a cost to permit applicants of time and travel and the rest of coming to attend the meeting that is not just a cost to out-of-state permit applicants, but in-state permit applicants too. So I think it's a significant resource consumer on both the staff and the applicant level, which may be worth it, but that's what we're trying to, if it's purely educational, if what we want, and I guess that's what it comes down to, is what do we really most want to get out of this? If it's an educational function, can we deliver the educational function that we think is necessary and appropriate? Is that best delivered in person, or can it be equally as well delivered without in person? Maybe that I probably went on too long, Michelle. I'm sorry for that.
No, that's okay. But here's my last question. I've looked in this. I don't see this page 6 you all are talking about. So if you could point me to it, I can.
Sorry. Hang on, Michelle. That's my fault because I didn't number the memo. But if you click on the tab for this agenda item and scroll down It's actually the fifth page of that
5.
PDF.
Sorry.
The fifth page of that PDF, Michelle, that's behind your agenda tab.
All right. I'll look for it. Okay.
Hey, Jay, can I say?
Antoine, I think you're talking. I can barely hear you. I don't know if others can or not. Antoine?
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
I was turned down. Just a couple things that I was just thinking about just on the application process. I know that we were talking about the initial application for permitting and the integrity of the pharmacy manager, but even when the pharmacy manager changes, that same training can be applied to when they actually change. That I think is what y'all probably are also seeking for, making sure that the pharmacy manager just knows what's involved.
Mm-hmm.
And just wanted to kind of raise that attention, not just initially on the initial permit, but just ongoing. So.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, I see Clint's hand up. I don't know if that's a new hand up or a residual hand up.
I think Antoine made a very good point.
I agree.
Because ordinarily those new PMs would not come to a permit meeting to hear the speech.
That is correct.
Now,
and
you know, and sometimes it's you, Jay, sometimes it's Josh or somebody else. It's not always.
Mercifully for all concerned, I haven't done one of these in a long time.
I think there's a place for having the executive director say, "Thou shalt not do such and so."
I tell you what, Bill, I get a lot of callers who tell me exactly what they think my place is, and that.
Probably just.
And often
I didn't say they were wrong.
Your database is skewed. Because at the end of the day, most people really want to know the rules. They want to do the right thing. And just tell them what the rules are. And they'll do their best to do it. The rest of them call you.
And often we do have, if something that does happen is that you were all referring to is that, there's a pharmacist manager put on paper, and then they come and then they want to change the pharmacist manager soon after the permit has been registered. We're well aware of that. And in those situations, we don't really allow that to happen. Josh investigates, we get an explanation of what the issue is. They, get told that they're not supposed to do that. It is mentioned that they are planning to be the pharmacist manager for the foreseeable future. So, we are cognizant that that does happen and trying to prevent it.
So Jay, just to summarize here, is the ask that we eliminate this in-person meeting? Obviously, that would require us to do what? Form a committee? I mean, or is this just a...
Yeah, here's, let me try. Yes, that's not making fun of you. That's my inability to form a sentence for them. I had some trans-ischemic attack, I think. What I am hearing from the members is, from all of you, is that you do think there is a value in emphasizing certain things to the PM, whether it be, frankly, a new PM on a new permit or a change pharmacist manager on an existing permit. That's where you see value here, is that the permit meetings, the informational value is communicating to a pharmacist manager, you are the pharmacist manager, here's what that entails, so that there is an understanding, nobody feels sandbagged about what they've done. So if that is right, and that sure seems right to me, then we could think about changing the rule to say something to the effect that, and again, I don't want to start wordsmithing on this, but we could look at adopting a rule that eliminated the in-person permit requirement and maybe had a rule instead that in some ways said that a new pharmacist manager on a permit would be required to complete or do certain training or whatever. We'd come up with what that is, and that we could look at coming up with a means of electronically delivering that to the pharmacist manager, and a mechanism for getting some assurance that the pharmacist manager had actually viewed it and participated in it. So what I would say is, if that's sort of the big picture of what y'all think would be appropriate, I think what would be helpful to staff is if we had a board member or two, and we could form a committee to work through the detail of this, and come back with a proposal for a rule amendment, and could also have some committee level discussions about what would we want, if we're going to do that, what would we want the content of the module to be, and what would be a sufficient level of tracking, that sort of thing.
So what are the board members' will about that?
I think it's a good plan. Like I said, I don't see any value in people having to show up, but I do see value in the educational part of it.
I agree with you, Bill.
I agree.
Keith?
I agree
I
as
would
well.
like to see that committee consider having this educational program available anytime somebody wanted to review it.
Oh yeah, if I would say, Bill, if we're going to go the trouble, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but if we're going to undertake the effort to create that, there's no reason that we'll hide it. Well, we can make it available to anybody who wants at any time.
And perhaps they could review it in the event of a change, review it within 30 days of the change and submit evidence that they reviewed it. Not necessarily a pass-fail, but evidence of review.
I think it's good for all pharmacists. I keep the list of pharmacist manager responsibility on my bulletin board. Sometimes I just review that to make sure I'm doing everything appropriately. So I think that would be something that pharmacist managers, if you've been a pharmacy manager for 5 years, it would be something good to review just to make sure you're covering all your bases. So I think more than just new permits would use that.
Yeah, I think it's a good tool to combat complacency.
So do we have any volunteers who want to be a member of that committee?
I'll do it.
All right, Keith, I'll be happy to do that too.
I'll join you.
Real quick, Andy, I don't mean to say this as it sounds like I was cutting you off. One thing to think about is we may have a whole lot of things coming out, committees coming out of today. So as long as it's less than 4 is fine, and then y'all can decide you want 2 or 3. Whatever your pleasure is on that, just understanding. Don't want anybody to feel like they got oversubscribed.
Well, that's a good point. Let Keith and Ashley handle that, and I'll jump on something else here later.
Is that good with everybody else? Michelle, Wallace, and Bill, are you good with that?
That's fine. I don't have a problem with it. The other thing you could approach it is just get, like, if we're talking about this task group to handle this item, this task group to handle this item, we can get it to the very end, and so that everybody knows what's out there and what things that we need for projects we need to work on and where you might be most interested or something.
Mm-hmm.
So should we wait to the very end to delegate those committee responsibilities, knowing that this item needs a committee?
If y'all want to do that, there's a lot to be said for that approach, I think, Ashley, with the number of things we have going on. And I'll just keep a list here of what we're going to form committees to do, and we can divvy those up if you like at the end.
I think that's perfect if everybody's good with that. Okay. So is everybody good with that? And we can move on to the next item. Missy, thank you for all your hard work on all that. And I know this is just the beginning. So thank you for your willingness.
I really appreciate you guys, taking this on, because I think it's one of those things to look at and do better. So thank you.
No, I think it's timely.
I do too. I think it's the perfect time for it. And with all the things going on with COVID and moving to to doing things virtual or changing things, I think it's a great time.
The other beauty of this kind of committee is if we're all smart, like I try to be when it comes to licensing stuff, the answer is do what Missy says needs to be done. And that usually is the right answer on all of those
silly.
things. It's true, Missy Batch. You know it is. Very good. Well, I took notes, and what I would Ashley, what I will do is when we get to the end of the retreat today, and as we assign everybody out, I'll
at about 12:30.
It's like, what did I do, Michelle?
I apologize. I apologize for that.
But what I'll do at the end of the day, obviously, once we have the assignments of who's doing what, is I'll redo short charge memos for each of the committees that summarizes what the general agreement are and sort of what the specific tasks are going to be for each of those. All right.
If I agree with Andy, you could then let Michelle and Keith, just divvy everybody up, just let them express what we're most interested in, and they can divvy it up.
All righty. Y'all want to move on? Oh, Michelle, don't worry about that. I thought there was something I'd left out.
No.
I thought you were saving me from myself.
No.
On that. Ashley, you want me to move on to the next item, or do folks need a break?
Well, we're going to take a break at 12 anyway, right?
And this next item is going to be the kind of thing that I think the amount of time we're going to need is just about right over before we take a lunch break on that.
So I say we move forward.
All right. So members, the next item for discussion, and I will say this is one that staff put in, and it really is going to be more discussion than potential action. I think some of you may remember that in December of last year, which seems like it was 8 months ago already during this COVID year, but in December of 2020, NBC News ran a story discussing complaints about mail order delivery of drugs. But what the story was really about specifically were concerns that temperature sensitive drugs shipped by mail can be exposed to conditions that could cause the drug to become adulterated. And there is some chatter among some boards of pharmacy around the country about maybe potentially undertaking rulemaking or other action in this area. I should point out there's been no request that I've received about doing this here in North Carolina, but we wanted to give you all a chance to talk about this issue today because it was something featured in the national news. It's interesting to raise this, though. It's important to emphasize that we've got, as a board, acting independently. We have some statutory constraints on what we would be able to do or not do in this arena, and specifically, there are provisions of the Pharmacy Practice Act that govern both in-state and out-of-state shipment and mailing of drugs that essentially tell the board that we lack the statutory authority to pass any requirement specific to mail or other similar delivery that is something that's not required by federal law. So there's not a whole lot we can do in that arena. We can, if the board wanted to, we can pass generally applicable rules governing the delivery of drugs. And so potentially the board could look at passing a rule that would say that anytime a temperature sensitive drug is provided to a patient in whatever fashion, in person, delivery, mail, whatever, that there would be certain requirements that would attach to that, but know that if we wanted to go that route, it would, under the North Carolina Administrative Procedures Act, would require that we do a cost benefit analysis of that rule, or proposal, which could be a little bit problematic. But I'll stop. I wanted to raise the issue because I know some of Andy, I think you and I may have talked about this briefly after the NBC News story aired, but just wanted to put it out there, and so we could be able to ventilate the issue, if for no other reason, to know fully what the landscape is if someone were to ask us to take some specific action.
Yeah, I can't remember, Jay. If we chatted, we may have. I remember this particular issue, and for what it's worth, I mean, I don't know if this is an appropriate correlation, but the way I think about it from a standpoint of should we do something is how many people have ordered HelloFresh or Blue Apron or something like that. So Sarah and I have experimented with a lot of those different companies. By the way, side note, Gobble seems to be the one we like the best, but that's a whole other issue. It could be because of the name. But, those boxes come with food, and, they're supposed to maintain a certain temperature or whatever. And we've had more than one incident where it was delayed. Maybe it got here a day later, whatever. The point I'm trying to make, I think, is that the general public, if food comes to them in a box, they can assess more easily whether that's been out of temperature, right? They can look at that and go, oh, wait a minute, that maybe it doesn't smell right. Maybe they can tell by the temperature inside the box, wow, I know it's not supposed to get that warm, whatever. But with a medication, they really can't vet that. They don't have the background to understand what limitations different pharmaceutical products have. So to me, I think it's something we have to act on, because I've seen myself with ordering food product over the internet that there are issues. So that's just food for thought.
Well, and just to I guess bring that to the as far as just your normal drugs, not even you talking about like your insulins or your specialty drugs, anything that sits in a mailbox that's in the middle of the summer in any part of North Carolina, with the exception of maybe the mountains, is going to go out of the temperature range. Plain and simple. I mean, so whatever that is, whether has to be stored at, refrigerated temperature, or, it's a bottle of atorvastatin, that the patient's ordered. So, how far do we take it?
And Jay, I know that you and I discussed this yesterday as we were reviewing over the agenda, but I think you brought to light to me that not only would we have to, this would be for mail order, but it would also be for products that are dispensed in a retail setting. And that kind of opened my eyes up to, wow, this could be a much bigger issue. I don't know if you can share that.
Yeah, so real quickly, and Clint can back me up on this too, all the mistakes I may utter here in the next couple minutes. But so the bottom line is this, is that if there was a perceived need for some sort of requirement specific to mail or common carrier delivery of drugs, whether that be especially temperature sensitive drugs or all drugs or whatever, because of the Pharmacy Practice Act's restriction on our authority, we could not pass a rule that says any temperature sensitive drug delivered by mail or common carrier must have a card or other device to indicate the temperature range it's exposed to. We could not do that. The legislature can, obviously, but we would not be able to do that ourselves. If we thought that there was a public health and safety need for requirements that would apply to all delivery of drugs, even if provided to someone at the pharmacy, to say, well, if it's specifically temperature sensitive or whatever, it has to be packaged in a certain way, or you have to provide the cards, we probably could do that. But again, it would not be limited to, I think, what has been identified as the most potentially problematic area, which is common carrier or mail delivery. It would have to apply across the board, which brings in a different cost to the folks that we regulate. Clint, did I get that?
Yeah, you did, Jay.
Right.
I mean, the General Assembly could make something specific to mail order. We cannot. We can do something general. If it's something general and even the slightest bit expensive, but it applies to all drugs that are dispensed, then you're going to get into the range where we need a fiscal note. Keith, as you point out, this applies to all sorts of drugs, and it applies to drugs dispensed in the pharmacy. If you leave it in the back of your car in August, then you may have a problem. If we could think of something that doesn't cost a lot, like at least you need to say what temperature it should be stored at and make it apply to everybody, then that is something that we could do without a fiscal note. So I guess my point is we can do three things. We can go to the General Assembly, or somebody can go to the General Assembly and get something specific to mail order. We can make it broadly applicable and expensive and go through the note process, or we could do something that is inexpensive and generally applicable.
Well, I think, what's our charge as board members?
Protect the public health and safety.
And and I know, Jay, you mentioned that you hadn't really, have you had complaints at all about?
No, I in 15 years, I can recall offhand 2 or 3 times in which someone has said that they suspected that a drug delivered to them was left, in some circumstance where the patient was concerned that it was not safe.
And 2, what responsibility falls upon the carrier? I mean, say, for instance, like FedEx, if it's a refrigerated biologic, and they guarantee overnight delivery and they fail to deliver that. I mean, so, there's a lot of moving parts there that we would have to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's my comment. As a compounder of many years, the most sensitive part of the whole cold chain system is the customer, the recipient. They will question even the slightest what they suspect might be temperature excursion. We've already heard, there's been no complaints that Jay has had to speak of. To me, this is a problem that doesn't need to be fixed. And that's because there's a huge economic incentive on the part of the shipper, the pharmacy, to make very sure that their stuff gets to the customer patient without being spoiled. As far as the shippers, Keith, you know this, you can bellyache to UPS and FedEx all day long, and they'll find some reason to say it wasn't their fault.
Oh, of course. I mean, and that was my point. I mean, they bear some responsibility they bear a lot of responsibility in getting the drug to the patient because they're the one who's carrying it to them.
And even if they get it there on time, that doesn't mean that in July they didn't put the cooler box, at the very top of the pile, right underneath the sunshade, right near the roof, where it's 150 degrees. There's no control over that. It's just, we take responsibility.
Yeah. Well, they deliver to me and throwing it on my driveway in the pouring rain. So, I mean, there's just, it's not the pharmacy's fault.
No, but you and I have to eat the cost.
Right.
Ashley, you know something about FedEx leaving something where it's not supposed to be. You're on mute, Ashley.
Yes, we had a FedEx package that I needed to sign for the board that was left 2 weeks ago, and I just located it. So,
Jay, could this be one of those situations where it's happening, but we're not getting complaints, much like medication errors?
Right. Yeah. I mean, right. I can barely remember getting any complaints of this sort over here, but is it underreporting. I mean, well, the truth of the matter is, anything that we're in charge of or to oversee is going to be underreported. And what the magnitude of that underreporting is or is not, I'm not trying to do the little sidestep. I just don't have any. I don't have any way to know. I don't know. I don't have any data set that would be able to tell me we think it really occurs X percent of the time, but it's only reported Y percent. I just don't know.
So for the boards out there that may have acted on this already or be in the process of acting, did they have more evidence that, hey, we've got an issue, or no?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right.
What's Virginia do? They're the most prescriptive board I know of.
I don't know.
Information.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think this is just one of those things that it happens. The business owner makes adjustments and goes on with life.
So Jay, are we good just to move on with this and say that we're not going to take a stance?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think just to let y'all know, anytime I'm ever asked this question, my answer is that North Carolina law does not impose temperature monitoring requirements on shippers of drugs, and have explained that in fact the Pharmacy Practice Act prohibits the Board of Pharmacy from requiring anything like that. That would be up to the legislature. But what I also tell folks is, in general, our state, just like every other state and just like the federal government, says that you cannot provide an adulterated drug product to a patient. So in a case where, and Keith, to go back to something you spot on, Peter, what can make these difficult is if you're going to hold a pharmacy responsible for a drug that you believe you could establish in a given instance had become adulterated because it went out of temperature spec, you would have to show that it was something that the pharmacy did. You know, if a pharmacy packages a drug product appropriately for delivery within the time frame that the common carrier indicates, and the common carrier misdelivers it or does whatever, we can't do anything about that. But if we had a case where a pharmacy we could show had a temperature sensitive drug and they didn't take any effort, they didn't package it as they should or any of that, we can take action on that. That would be adulteration under existing law. So we're not without power to act. The question is, you know, sort of putting an upfront requirement on pharmacies that to provide the evidence, I guess, for lack of a better word, or lack of a better phrase.
Jay, do you still have pharmacy interns that could perhaps probe ISMP for medication error type information related to
we probably could.
Drug injury. The biggest concern I have is when drugs like Lantus and some of these other short-acting insulin monomers freeze. That to me is far more dangerous than if a torvastatin gets stored at 120 degrees for 4 hours, because that's part of the manufacturer's due diligence. They have to do force degradation, and one of the stressors is heat. But when it comes right down to patient care, when insulin freezes, that's a big deal. And I also wonder if we could give all the patients in the state your cell phone number, so anytime they have a drug delivery issue, they can call you.
We can do that, but we're going to have a separate closed session to discuss what my new compensation is going to be to undertake that particular responsibility. or I guess you could say you'll find somebody who will.
Let them call the COVID hotline and complain about their drug delivery.
Anyway, what we could do, Ellen, I think you're still on. Ellen has students that come through. We could assign a student to come through to see, to shake the trees a little bit and see what's out there in terms of these. I'm exposing a bias. I'm a little skeptical that we're going to get anything like that from ISMP. They don't really track individual stuff, and over the years, I've sort of been repeatedly frustrated trying to get help from ISMP on most anything. But we could certainly have somebody shake the trees and see what might be out there.
We've got a student coming in May that sounds like a good project that they could have a look at, Bill.
I don't know how much you can get out of FDA through the MedWatch, but that might be another, and I think we're beating the bushes looking for evidence, but it might.
Well, but it's certainly not an inappropriate expenditure of some intern time and effort to at least survey the waterfront and see what if anything is out there. At least that would provide us some basis for further discussion or not, depending on what's out there. It seems like a completely appropriate thing to do to me. Actually, I think that's probably about where we can get on this one, unless there's.
Sorry, I'm still muted. I've got dogs running around, people running around, trying to keep y'all.
Well, Leslie has Mookie here today, so maybe Mookie will make an appearance.
So I was just going to say, it sounds like our next step is that Ellen's student in May is going to do some research for us, but we're just going to table that until that time to see if we have any more information about any complaints that are presented.
Yep, that sounds good. And Bill, I think that was a great suggestion. And Ellen, that makes your precepting that month a little bit easier. You got a built-in project.
I still maintain that the customer's the most sensitive part of the process, unless they just don't know. I mean, I bet there's going to be a lot of problems in the Texas area with insulin freezing, and there may be plenty of patients who don't know. They just don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
For a variety of reasons.
Yeah, they don't know.
And that's the inherent problem with mail order delivery.
Yep.
It's poor patient counseling.
Ashley, I think that's got us. Do you want to take a lunch break and then reconvene? And what time's y'all's pleasure?
I hear the doorbell ringing now.
So that sounds good to me. If everybody else is okay with that. I feel like, is Michelle still on for some reason?
Absolutely. It kicked me off, but I came right back.
Okay, sounds good. You went away and I was like, is she okay? All right, that sounds good. So do we want to take a 30-minute lunch break? Is that enough time for everybody?
It's plenty for me.
That's fine with me. How about if we say, just give it, it's 12:06. Why don't we say 12:45? Reconvene at 12:45. That'll give me time to run across the street.
Leave the meeting and come back, or just stay on?
Antoine, what's your suggestion there?
Stay on.
Okay. Just mute and turn your camera off.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
12:45 it is. Hey, thanks for the great discussion so far. This is exactly what I was hoping we'd get out of this. So you guys are great. Thank you. All right. See everybody in 38 minutes.
Clint, you already had lunch? Where'd you skip lunch? You're muted.
I had a late breakfast, so I didn't eat any lunch. Most days I don't eat lunch. That's how I keep my trim physique.
Mm. Mm. I don't skip many meals. Let me introduce you to the new Sergeant at Arms for the board. Self-appointed.
Well, that's better than the lizard.
Think so?
I'll say I only eat 2 meals, but I do have a Costco peanut butter pretzel thing by my home office desk that I eat on all day.
Peanut butter with pretzel. Is that healthy?
Probably healthier than what I'd eat for lunch if I ate lunch.
Well, I'm having red bean soup with rice.
Well, that's nice. I've been tasked with making country fried steak tonight, so that will not be healthy.
That sounds good. I do all the cooking in our house. My wife just said it's not worth it.
I do all the fancy 5-step meals that dirty every pot in the kitchen, and my wife does all the functional, we need to eat now in 10 minutes.
We need to check out those expensive meals that Andy was talking about.
They're actually
a lot of groceries for what that stuff costs.
Ashley, do you still have your desk?
The desk is still here. I'm not sure that I have a bed. I didn't make it on that side of the house, but there's a lot of furniture gone.
Are you in your old house or your new house?
I'm in the old house.
Oh, okay. So stuff's
Yeah.
leaving, not coming. Huh?
Yes. Bill, we did find a good home for the donkeys.
Oh.
Yeah. The new owners did not want to keep them, so.
Is that any way to talk about your children, Ashley? Well, that's just mine that I talk about.
No.
I'm keeping the kids.
Talking about her mother-in-law.
Oh.
But we found them a home, and they've been there for about 3 weeks now, and I get pictures, updates, and they're doing good. My parents took all the chickens, and I think they love the chickens more than they love me now. So.
Are you moving in town or something?
I am. We are moving about 2 minutes from the drugstore. So.
That is going to be a dangerous thing for you, I think.
Well, you wouldn't believe the trips that I make on the weekend. And so.
Ashley, you're too good.
So anyway, I'm thankful that it won't be an hour-long affair. It'll be a 10, 15-minute affair. So.
Plus, if you get snacky, you can just run in and grab a Snickers or something.
That's right. That's right.
If any of y'all haven't been in Ashley's drugstore anytime in the relative area, you owe it to yourself to go. Well, one, because it's nice to see Ashley, but the interior, what she has done with that store since she bought it from Stan, it's beautiful in there. It's just a terrific layout. Feels very warm, and it's.
Are you telling us that Stan did not focus on the feng shui of the pharmacy?
No,
Stan had many strengths. That interior decoration was not one of them.
We had to make it a little more cozier. Keith has a beautiful pharmacy as well. If you
I
haven't
know.
visited Keith's pharmacy, he has a very nice,
When-
beautiful pharmacy as well.
Whenever the plague has lifted sufficiently, Amy and I, one of our first planned travels is to go up to Boone Blowing Rock. And so when we do that, I will make sure to come through Louisville. And Keith, I can come in and scare your text to death if you want me to.
Oh, that would be fun. Really, the pharmacist would be even better. Thanks, Ashley, for the compliment.
You do have a nice store. I agree. I've been in yours. I haven't been in Ashley's.
Thank you, Bill.
I don't have one. Thank goodness. No employees.
You might be the smartest of us all.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'll tell you, managed to make it all the way through my compounding career without a visit from the FDA. My greatest achievement.
That's solid work there. Hey, Bill, by the way, I don't know if you saw Missy sent the statistic. There were roughly 12,800 in-state licensed pharmacists at the start of renewals, and 12,300 have renewed. So there were of about 12,300 or 4,000 eligible to vote. We've gotten 2,200.
I don't remember what it was the last time I ran. It was close to that.
I don't think we've had 14,000 in-state licensed pharmacists yet. I looked for the
Right.
last few years. It's always been 12,000-ish.
Yeah, 12 was the number that stuck in my head as well.
So I guess we're waiting on Wallace and Michelle. There comes Wallace.
There's Wallace. You spoke him into existence.
There we go.
Now it's a party.
There's Michelle.
Before we get started, I need to introduce the newest member of the staff. This is a voluntary member of the board.
Oh, I love it, Bill. I love it.
Sergeant at Arms.
Did you make that one, Bill?
Yeah. Can you see his gold tooth?
God, that is beautiful work. Really beautiful.
His boots. Anyway.
That's outstanding.
We need a name for him. And he's going to sit right here next to me in case any of y'all
get out of line.
Hurling insults or something.
There was a faculty member at Vanderbilt Law School when I was there, from whom I took 3 classes. He was a great teacher, but a spectacularly odd guy. And when he was in faculty meetings, he had a sock puppet, and he would speak through the sock puppet and demand that people address him through the sock puppet during faculty meetings.
Lamb chop.
Tenure is a wonderful thing, clearly.
I think we've got some drugs for that.
Well, it was his name was Hal Mayer, but his nickname around school, which he knew about, was the Mad Cow. And
So Jay, it's 12:45. Are we good to get started?
I'm all set if y'all are. So we got everybody.
So it looks
online.
like we are moving into review of out of practice reinstatement rule. Policy.
Yeah. So y'all will recall a discussion item. Y'all will recall that we have a rule that says that if a pharmacist has been out of practice for 2 years or more, the board shall require that pharmacist, as a condition of reinstatement or reciprocation, to obtain continuing education, retake tests, or get practical experience as the board deems necessary. And we have a general policy that if someone has been out of practice for 2 years or less, they just need to catch up their continuing education. Someone who has been out of practice for more than 2 years, but less than 5 years, they are required, the default policy is obtain 500 hours of internship, take and pass the MPJE. And then the baseline policy is if they've been out of practice for 5 years or more, they have to reacquire 1,500 hours of practical experience, retake and pass both the NAPLEX and the MPJE. And we've had a couple of these cases come up, and there was some indication that now might be a good time to sort of talk about, I mean, the rule is the rule, but an opportunity to talk about the policy, that the board's baseline policy. Do you still feel like it's a good policy? Should there be changes to it, or any consideration of changes to that, or anything y'all wanted to talk about in terms of philosophy or policy about how we should approach these cases? And so what you've got is the rundowns of the people who have asked for departures from the baseline policy since 2010 and how the board has approached those. So with that, I will throw it open if y'all want to talk about what we need to do, if anything, on this, or how you would like to approach these cases, or how you would like the staff to approach these cases in terms of bringing them to the full board.
Well, I got a question. With COVID, have we seen any increases in, people that have been entrepreneurs in some other area other than pharmacy that had a pharmacy license that have been out and for 10 years or whatever, but the restaurants gone south because of COVID? Have we seen any kind of a bump in any of these people that, have given up their license or not renewed their license, let it lapse because they had this new thing going? And usually when the economy turns south, that's when some of these guys come back, to get their license back. That used to be, that precipitated this rule, years ago. We just had a flood of people that had been out of pharmacy for a long time. When the economy went south, they came back.
I have not seen that. Wallace, Missy, have you detected any significant increase in out of practice applicants?
No.
I mean, we do. No, it's a great question, Wallace. And as you all know, what we do have in place right now under a waiver is if someone who's been out of practice for 2 years or less, we've supplied a very quick way for them to reactivate their license to help with the COVID crisis. And Missy, I'd say we've had a handful of those. Would that be
I think
the
like
right subjective
3
unit of measure?
I think 3 have been fully reactivated. I was working with one just the other day, and she still doesn't have a place of employment, so she hasn't been reactivated yet. But yeah, we've officially reactivated 3.
So Wallace, the answer to your question is we really haven't seen a bump in that. And I wouldn't say that we get, in general, tons of these sorts of requests, period. I think the way these come before, the only ones that ever come before y'all, obviously, are folks who've been out of practice for more than 2 years. And invariably, there are 2 waiver requests that are made of you. One is for elimination or reduction of the internship hours required for a reinstatement or reciprocity for an out of practice candidate. And 2, a request that the applicant not have to retake the NAPLEX. We rarely get a request for waiving the MPJE, because if it's a reciprocity candidate, they all have to take the MPJE. So it's not a waivable sort of thing. But if it's somebody who's been out 5 years or more, they tend, and certainly can understand why, not to be super interested in taking the NAPLEX. And So I just wanted us to have an opportunity to talk through, are we comfortable where we're drawing the lines? Do we need to further consider the policy, or are you comfortable with what we've got and handling these cases as they come up on their particular facts? That's why I've given you these backgrounds statement of how you've dealt with them in the past. And I got to say, I think there's been a very high degree of consistency in the way you deal with these, that if you go back and read these summaries in cases where you have reduced, and it tends to be a reduction in the practical hours required, it's usually because you found that either that applicant has been engaged in something, if not direct pharmacy practice adjacent, that you think is relevant to maintaining skill and that sort of thing. So,
I mean, if you look at over the last 10 years, I mean, there's only 10 cases. There are 10 situations that you put up here. So obviously it's not eating a lot of board time. So to me,
no, one quick thing on that, Ashley, though, and this sort of, it's analogous to a question Andy had asked back when we were talking about delivery, is, do we have folks who don't seek reinstatement because they look at the policy and say, oh, well, I'm not going to do it. And that's an unanswerable question, Ashley, and I'm not suggesting that should drive what you think, but you're right. The ones who come before the board, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen very often.
Oh, Bill, you're on mute.
Thank you. Jay, are you looking for more guidance from the board on how staff should handle these requests without bringing them to the full board?
No, not necessarily, Bill.
Okay.
I think that if there were a category of cases that you guys had seen come before the board, you thought those don't really need to come before us, I would certainly be interested in guidance on that. But I think more sort of, I wanted y'all to think about is, are you comfortable with the policy we have? Is it drawing the right lines and realizing it's a baseline policy that is not binding on anyone? It leaves you guys discretion, as does the rule, to tailor a set of reinstatement conditions that matches the particular candidate. Are you still comfortable?
Many of them that I remember, you know, the applicant was whining about having to do an internship. Some of these people came from industry, and there was a lot of discussion around, okay, just so you work for Glaxo doesn't mean you know how to dispense Eliquis and counsel the patient, for example. One lady had been practicing. She had just let her license lapse in North Carolina, then decided she wanted it back. I don't remember any evidence that she wasn't competent to practice. It was just a more procedural thing. And I don't remember how we decided it, but I don't think we required an internship of her.
I think that's right. I think I know the case you're talking about, and I think that's right. Let me ask y'all this question that sort of relates on this. What, in terms of staff thinking about these, let's say we have an applicant, and this is going to be a reciprocity situation. So you have an applicant who is licensed to practice and has been continuously licensed to practice pharmacy in the state from which they're reciprocating. They've maintained CE. They could begin practicing at any moment in that state, but just happens to have not been practicing for some period of time. And there are various reasons, of course. A lot of times, frankly, I'll tell you guys, it's a pharmacist who maintained a license, maintained CE for the license, but may have stepped away from practice for a period of more than 2 years to raise a family and is coming back. And I always struggle a little bit about how to handle those, because maybe they haven't been actively practicing, but they've been actively licensed and eligible to practice the entire time. Any thoughts on how we should handle those, or should those?
Well, is the 2 years too restrictive out of practice? Do you think?
I think, I don't know. What I would say is that I think 2 years is safe. I think that if someone who's only been out of practice for 2 years and they're coming back and they've got to catch up their CE anyway, I don't recall that we've ever had any problem with folks coming back in that circumstance and relicensing, any public health and safety problem. Now, whether that could be stretched out more, I don't have it. I don't have an empirical answer for that.
You know, if that person were to maintain their licensure and CE status, they'd never hit the radar.
Correct.
Safe to practice. It'd be like me. I mean, I'm not safe to practice.
We'll get that in the minutes, Bill.
No, but I think that's the issue, right? So to me, as I think about this issue and have thought about it for a long time, that's the gap, right? So you've got some people that fall under some level of scrutiny, and then some people that they don't come across the radar, and that's the concern, right?
Well, right, Andy, and that's, yeah, I think that's really the nub of, like I say, where at least I struggle on a staff end when somebody comes in, is that to me at least, it seems there's at least there's at least a qualitative difference, perhaps, between somebody who has not had an active license anywhere for some period of time. So they have not been obligated to maintain continuing education and all the rest of that, versus somebody who has maintained a license and has maintained the CE requirements and all the other things that we say and that the law says, as long as you do those things, you are deemed safe and competent to practice pharmacy. I do think there's a qualitative difference there, at least.
I mean, have we allowed it to get to a point where it's arbitrary? I mean,
right. I think if there were one thing that would be helpful to me, which be helpful to me is not the basis for having a retreat, but just stating something as from a staff perspective, is it would be useful to know going forward, to have a better idea about how do I handle these folks in this situation who have been continuously licensed somewhere, no discipline or other issues that would bring scrutiny in that way. They maintain their CE and the rest, but maybe they haven't practiced pharmacy for 3 years because they were raising a family or whatever it is. Will we have a policy that there be sort of a thought that if that's been the case, then they're not subject to intern hours or retesting, versus someone who's not had a license at all? And Ashley, I'm sorry I blathered on here, and Clint has politely had his hand up and I kept talking.
Well, the only thing I would say in response to Andy's question about is it arbitrary is the one thing you learn in law school and as a lawyer is that it is impossible to write a rule that covers everybody you want to cover without including people you don't want to cover. And that doesn't make imperfection arbitrary. The real question is, could you get a rule that is closer to whatever you deem to be an appropriate rule in light of those imperfections?
Right.
So in this case, we're talking about policy, not rule, right?
Yeah, right. Because the rule, I don't think there's any need to change the rule. I actually think the rule is a very well written and well thought out rule that says when somebody's been out of practice for more than 2 years, you can craft a specific sort of re-entry to practice plan. Maybe that be the best way to describe it. And that, as you would hope, it does leave it to you all to assess the particulars of that particular applicant, what their practice has been, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have any concern about the language of the rule. like I said, my particular issue from a staff point is if we think that someone who's been continuously licensed and doing all the things needed to maintain a license in a state, would we say those folks aren't subject to the reentry requirement? That we're not, if you've been licensed and are eligible to practice pharmacy where you were, we're not going to do a look behind on that to see, well, are you really, or do we need to do that? I think that's a question on the table, at least from my standpoint.
Well, the one thing that just came to mind as we're talking about this, that there are people who have, who are practicing, like even whether it's in North Carolina or other states, that aren't as competent as people who haven't practiced in 2 years. Because people can complete X number of CE hours per year and not get anything from them, to be quiet, when you can have an in-person CE and you can go and play on your phone for an hour or for
Keith, I was just going to say, as I pretty continuously in the evaluations of the CEs I get, that's exactly the comment. They can sit through the whole CE and get nothing out of it.
But I mean, I don't know if I may be going down too tangentially here, but if somebody's been okay to practice in another state and they've stayed licensed, and yes, I don't think we need to do anything else. I mean, because I know that all 50 states are different, but are the CE requirements close enough to where there's no point in splitting hairs over this?
My view of that, Keith, is why the quantity of CE differs somewhat among states and the live versus non-live differs somewhat. I would say that functionally, the requirements to maintain a license in any state are substantively identical.
In South Carolina, they say that half your CE must be related to patient care activities. Well, that's so loosely defined, and I don't know that all the CE I've submitted to South Carolina in the past, they've never questioned it. I don't know how they could. In my mind, when we're asked to evaluate a candidate who's been out of practice for 2 years, but they have some relevant healthcare experience, I want to know more about what that experience entailed. And I perceive a certain amount of reluctance during a board meeting to really challenge a candidate on those deeper questions, because we're either scared, we don't want to embarrass them, or we don't want to talk in public, or we may not want to take up board time doing it. So maybe in some of these cases, Jay, we could develop some sort of survey tool that will identify better what their practice has been, even though they are technically out of practice. That way we can get, as background material, we can get a lot better database on these applicants that are coming to us. And they're so few and far between that I think, other than that, I don't know that we need to change it. But it would be better to have, as we're sitting there in the meeting talking to these people about their, what they did for SmithKline or Glaxo, or whatever. Exactly what their relevant experience was. Because then we're having to evaluate the practice of pharmacy. Well, the practice of pharmacy is very, very broad.
Sorry, Bill, I didn't mean to.
That's all right. I'm just rambling.
On top of it.
I'm going to get the sergeant at arms to.
At the end of the day, is our intent here to determine, to some extent, are we comfortable that this person is competent to practice?
Yeah, the first principle is as is true for any person seeking a license from the board, is that the duty is to assure yourself on behalf of the public that that person is capable of practicing with reasonable safety and skill.
So in being the devil's advocate here, I would make the argument that what we're doing, we cannot assess whether they're competent or not, because the only way to determine whether they're competent is for them to be tested. We can put them out in practice and let them do an obligatory number of hours or whatever the case may be, but we have no quality assurance in place to assess the quality of those hours. We have no way to determine whether, other than them showing up and doing them, that they're gaining anything from it. I mean, we can make people do CE if they haven't done their CE, and even there, as Keith says, we can't keep them from sitting there and doing things on their phones. I guess I'm not trying to complicate the issue here. I just want to say the things that I'm thinking out loud so that we can make sure we're making a good decision. Are we making people jump through hoops and saying that satisfies our concern about making sure they're competent, but at the end of the day, it's really not doing anything to give us any indication that they're competent? Did I state that okay?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and so right, and to that, Andy, right, obviously anyone, first a new applicant for a license to practice pharmacy, we have, you're right, the way we assess competency fundamentally is taking and passing the NAPLEX and the NPJE, and then there's an experiential component, of course. But that's, as you all know, that with the advent of the PharmD curriculum in the late 90s, the board went to saying, well, the hours, if you graduate with a Doctor of Pharmacy from an accredited PharmD program, you are deemed to have acquired in the course of that program the experiential hours you need for licensure. So fundamentally, yes, Andy, that the way we have to determine if somebody's safe and competent is, can they pass the licensing exams, which is what for any profession. And that does sort of take me back to the question I was asking, that if someone is coming to North Carolina as a reciprocity candidate, and they have been continuously licensed, but they haven't practiced pharmacy, they still have done the things that another state would say need to be done to have a reasonable assurance of safety and competency. So I don't think I'm saying anything different, Andy. I think we're saying similar things. I keep breaking things into the have been continuously licensed file versus the I'd let my licenses lapse and I haven't been licensed to practice pharmacy at all for X period of time, whatever it is.
Thank you.
I think you can carry it a little bit further too, though, and say, what practice setting do they plan, are they going into in North Carolina? I mean, because I'm not competent, even though I'm licensed, to go do what Sarah does. She's an oncology pharmacist. I mean, I can identify some of the drugs by name. But that's about it. I don't know anything else about them. I mean, that's just not my area. Where she doesn't feel competent to come and do what I do, which I told her it's not nearly as complicated.
I don't sell yourself short, Keith. I don't think that's true at all. But I think that's just one of the things we need to we probably do need to take into consideration. Is what setting are they going into, because the competencies vary.
What if they don't know? What if they're just moving to the mountains and they've lived in Ohio and they never thought about getting licensed in North Carolina? So either they're already licensed in Ohio and then there's no problem, or they've been formulation scientist at whatever, and now want to practice pharmacy.
That's a great question.
I don't know why they would, but
if I move to the
it's just a lot of facts. There's a lot of individual questions that need to be asked.
But I'm just playing devil's advocate here, like Andy. But aren't we doing that when there's a circumstance that may be different from the norm when they come to the board and we're able to ask them questions about that? Is that kind of how those cases are fielded to us, Jay?
Yeah, generally what I do, and thinking about what Bill suggested, if I could be a little, I could and probably should be a little more programmatic about how I do it is anytime somebody, so if somebody applies for licensure, and again, practically what we're talking about for purposes of this discussion is a reciprocity candidate, right? I mean, if it's somebody who's seeking to reinstate, well, I guess there's a circumstance where it could be a reinstatement, but at any rate, I'm going down the rabbit hole. What I do is if staff identifies somebody seeking licensure, either through reinstatement or through reciprocity, which is licensure without examination, and we identify that candidate as someone who has not practiced pharmacy for more than 2 years, then we send them what we call the out of practice letter. Missy sends it, and that describes, here are the baseline requirements. And we say, if you would like to request a departure from any of these baseline requirements, you may request to appear before the board and do that. And I ask them to provide, when they do that, to provide a letter and a CV that will say, well, this is exactly what I'm asking you to waive, and here's why, and for them to describe what they deem their relevant experience or plans or other things in a CV to do that. Obviously, some people are more, I guess, expansive in their provision of that sort of material than others. So certainly I could make folks be more specific in what they provide, but in gross, Ashley, yes, that's exactly how it works.
Well, it sounds like to me we don't need to do anything other than what we're already doing.
Let me go back and just press one little bit more on that. Do you feel that way for somebody who is licensed in another state and has been continuously licensed? To me, there is a distinction in my mind. That doesn't mean it's right or it
so
matters.
why would they hit the radar on reciprocity if they've been continually licensed?
Because part of the reciprocity application, both for us and for NABP, is you list your history of where you've been practicing and what you've been doing. And so occasionally we get a reciprocity candidate from another state who will apply for a North Carolina license. Let's say reciprocated an Ohio license, just for discussion's sake. They've been continuously licensed in Ohio, eligible to practice in Ohio, but they say on the application where you list what you've been doing, they may put they show they've got a 3-year gap where they haven't been practicing pharmacy. And they'll say,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
They'll say what?
Oh, they'll say there may be, as they list what they've been doing.
Yeah.
They may say not practicing pharmacy for 3 years or whatever. Again, most often it's someone who stepped back from active practice for a period of time to raise a family, to care for a family member who's ill, that sort of thing. That's mostly.
But we never ask those questions for somebody that's licensed in North Carolina.
Correct.
So why would we be doing that for out-of-state people? They're no different than North Carolinians.
Right. That's the question I'm asking, is that if you believe that, and I think you would have reason to believe that fundamentally the requirements to maintain licensure as a pharmacist in any of the states have some differences at the margin, but at the heart of it is pretty much the same.
Well,
Actually, I think that's
at that point you have to qualify what constitutes a practice of pharmacy. Am I practicing pharmacy today? I think so. Am I practicing?
I think you are too.
When I go to do an accreditation site survey, is that the practice of pharmacy? I think so, but it's not dispensing.
Right. But Bill, you're spot on. I mean, that's the other piece that comes to it. It's easy for staff when it's easy for staff when the answer is, I haven't been licensed to practice pharmacy for X period. That's easy. It's easy for staff, although it may not be the right, where somebody says, yes, I've been licensed, but I have not been doing anything in the practice of pharmacy for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, any way you'd want to define it. Then yes, Bill, there does get to be this tertiary sort of level where somebody's been doing something that's not a traditional practice of pharmacy. Now, the way I've always approached that is with a pretty expansive notion of what constitutes the practice of pharmacy, that there's not, a model, and if you don't do X and Y, then you're not really practicing pharmacy. I think our profession has a long history of eating its own young on that sort of thing. But so if somebody applies, Bill, like if somebody had been continuously licensed as a pharmacist, but they said, I have been working for Pfizer as a pharmaceutics researcher, I would not bring that to y'all. I would not deem the policy as applying because, in my view, they are practicing in the pharmacy sciences. But if our answer was, as long as you've been continuously licensed to practice pharmacy someplace, we don't have to ask that. I don't have to get into those weeds.
Well, it's always been my problem or question about this whole thing. It's just the disconnect that we've been talking about for the last, 10 minutes or so. We've been talking about this.
What's the disconnect?
Just the fact that, between this guy that's been practicing and where do you draw the line? When does it come up? If I've been running my restaurant but I've never let my license lapse, and I've been going to CE and I've been checking all the boxes, and I'm coming back after 5 years because, like I say, the restaurant went south, and so it's always, I don't know, it's always been the whole thing to me is how are we being consistent?
They want to be a compounding pharmacist, at least they know how to measure and.
You got a point there.
I guess my struggle here
you
is.
might ask why the restaurant went south, so
I guess my struggle here is that if we don't require North Carolina pharmacists to do that and we don't ask any questions about that, why would we require out-of-state pharmacists to do that?
I think it's a great question.
And they've done the CE and they've done everything in their state. Why would we treat them any differently than a North Carolina pharmacist?
But Ashley, if they've been out of practice in North Carolina and want to resume practice, I think the same questions would be asked.
Well,
but if
they've maintained their license, then
Okay.
we can't ask that question.
Well, if they maintain their license and they're out of state, then they do come under some degree of scrutiny, whereas a licensed pharmacist in North Carolina would not. Is that the?
That's correct.
All right.
That's correct. And if there were an articulable, I think you can draw that distinction if there's a basis to draw it, and that's where if you would have to say, well, if you had a concern that in another state, sort of the things that are required for someone to show that they've maintained in the eyes of the law a level of sufficient safety and competency to continue practice, if you think they're not doing that, so that would be a basis for drawing a distinction. But I at least can't put my finger on what that would be, because most people's requirements to maintain a license are almost identical.
And Jay, when that person reciprocates to North Carolina, that board that they're currently licensed in, you would be able to get information about any type of, disciplinary action.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, that's a different kettle of fish, right? If you had somebody, who was reciprocating an Ohio license to practice pharmacy, and they'd been continuously licensed and all the rest of it, but they had been disciplined by the Ohio Board of Pharmacy.
That would be a different ballgame.
Yeah, that always comes before that, and so yeah, that doesn't implicate the existing rule at all. That's subject to the normal sort of vetting process.
Now, in South Carolina, I feel like what the board there would do is form a committee, and they'd have a committee of board members that reviewed these licenses. Now, I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but I'm just curious why, and this is maybe tangential to this discussion, but why does South Carolina board members why do they do things the way they do it, I guess?
I can't answer that.
Well, I know the way I asked it, it was really stupid, but
no, it's not that. It's not. I know what you're asking. They do. It's sort of.
They seem to form a committee for everything.
Well, right. I think part of their process is that you're right. If somebody comes in, and I don't even know if it's. I'm on the thin edge of the limb. Let me state that right here, but they do a lot more sort of intensive, individualized review of both pharmacists and pharmacies seeking to do business in South Carolina, and tend to do that much more often by having, you're right, Bill, committees and personal appearances before committees to get in. I certain they have their reasons. What information they think they obtain from that bears on their licensing decisions, I just don't know.
Isn't that fundamentally, not that we are trying to talk about something out of school that we don't know a lot about, but they have two bodies. They have an investigative arm and they have a board arm. And so we're all that together. So does that predicate that they get into these other ancillary issues because the inspections and investigation side is a completely separate entity in South Carolina? Is that part of it?
It might. I don't know. That's possible.
I think it's just the way they've done things, and
my guess, Bill, is that yes, that's a product of inertia.
And I think they should clean up their own internal act. But anyway, never mind. He's after me.
I want to state for the record that I think the executive director in South Carolina is an absolutely delightful, competent executive director. I know Andy agrees with that.
Love her to death.
So back to the topic
at
hand.
I don't know the current lady, but so I guess if we had enough of these, then we could form a committee of 2 board members to review them and make recommendations like we do with CPP applicants. But at one a year or more, well, you may see more than that.
We don't really, Bill. Like I say, I don't think I think that your benefit for expenditure of doing a committee thing is probably not worth it.
No, I agree for this.
So Jay, would your life be easier if we were to say that if a pharmacist reciprocating from another state had active license and had kept up their CE, that doesn't have to come before the board? Is that maybe what you're asking?
I guess, what, from a staff perspective, what I would prefer is if there were a modification to the policy. And when I say modification, it's really more just sort of a clarification to say that the out of practice requirements only come into play when someone has not been licensed to practice pharmacy at all for a period of more than 2 years. If someone has been continuously licensed, that out of practice, we don't go through this exercise of then having to figure out, okay, well, what does out of practice really mean? Why were they out of, all of that sort of stuff? That would be simpler. But the question, of course, is simple is nice for staff process. Are you comfortable as the guardians of the public health and safety that provides a sufficient protection for the public health and safety?
Well, personally,
my sense is it does, but
well, I mean, I think we still need to have whatever due diligence, if something doesn't feel right or smell right, to be able to raise it and not just check a box and say, well, that's what the board said do.
No, I agree with that, and certainly, Bill. One of the things that Missy's staff and Missy are very, very good at is they've got pretty good radars, right? If something just looks odd on an application, and I'm not talking about out of practice specifically, but anytime we got very experienced folks, and when something looks out of the ordinary on an application that appears to raise some possible concern, we have an internal process that Missy's licensing specialist will bring it to Missy for review, and if she's capable of resolving that or feels comfortable resolving that, then she does, and if not, she kicks it up to me and they go back. So we sort of have an internal process, as we do for everything we do here at the staff, for thinking through if something really seems to be the kind of thing that we're not comfortable making a decision on and that y'all need to make a decision on. I think that if you were to modify and again, we're not talking about an applicant that has a significant disciplinary history and all those things are always going to come to y'all. But my personal opinion is that if someone has been continuously licensed as a pharmacist, they have satisfied what every state in the United States says is the legally requisite minimum level of competence to practice pharmacy.